Yay!
Wait,
All right, everybody, welcome
are
to.
we?
Are we live?
Are we good?
I think so.
Yeah.
Gotta update
Yeah,
it on Twitch.
Yeah. So I upgraded my computer today, which means
Oh, no.
nothing's working right.
Upgraded.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Upgraded how?
The operating system. All right. So today on our Antisyphon live stream, we have Ralph with us. We got Serena with us. We got Ryan with us. I'm Jason. I'm the content community director at Black Hills, and I help out with the Antisyphon team. And we're doing a live stream. And today we asked Ralph to do one, and he said, yeah, I got something. And so we're going to do that. We're streaming on LinkedIn, Twitch, YouTube. And so if you want to subscribe to any of those, thank you. We are now Twitch affiliates, so that means you can subscribe to that. We don't know what that's going to get you yet, but we're working on it, where there's going to be like things that you get, like you get free comic books or something. But I'm going to stop talking about that because it's Ralph's turn. Ralph.
Yes.
What are you going to talk about?
Hi. Oh, yeah. Well, so Jason hit me up the other day. He was like, you want to talk about something? And I just didn't know what to talk about. But I decided to talk about VPNs today. And we're going to kind of start off real slow. So this is kind of really some fundamental stuff. But as opposed to getting into some real technical challenges. But we are going to talk about VPNs, but we're going to start off with SSH because this is something that people don't really realize, and something that we use a lot in security tests and other things like that. And we have this problem, and the problem is we need to route some traffic back to our computer, or we need to route some traffic from our computer to another system, right? And kind of the Swiss Army knife of that is SSH tunnel. So I thought I would kind of show how that works. I was even talking to some other people today, and they didn't know some of the flags for the SSH tunnels, right? And so it's kind of interesting. But we're going to expand that a little bit further. So I'm going to show you WireGuard off, which is another kind of VPN technology that's incredibly simple to set up and allows you to kind of expand what you can do with SSH tunnels. And then I'm going to take it one more step further than that. And we're going to show another product called Tailscale, which is a VPN WireGuard managed orchestrator. It kind of makes it really easy to get a bunch of computers all connected together without having to do some of the configuration we're going to do. So, yeah.
Two things. One, in the chat, let us know what you think SSH stands for. Wrong answers only. And two, we are not brought to you by any kind of NordVPN or OpenVPN. There's no sponsorship for today's. In fact, if we turn on like monetization, I think at some point they'll just like insert NordVPN at the beginning of this video. So just want to let you know we're not sponsored. Wow.
Yes, we're not.
Wow, Ryan.
Nothing I'm going to talk about today was I paid for or told to talk about.
All right, go ahead, Ralph. Teach us all the things.
All right, sure. So what I have here is a Windows session here. I have this little like terminal program, but long story short, this is PowerShell. And I am going to use this computer to connect to a Ubuntu host, right? But I don't really have one, right? So I'm going to kind of go grab one real quick. One thing that we use a lot is DigitalOcean. So over here on this tab, I have a DigitalOcean account. I've already logged in. And we're going to set up a VM real quick. To do that, on the left-hand side, I'm just going to make a droplet. So go to create a droplet. And I'm going to pick Ubuntu, pick a size here, pick a region. These all really don't matter for what I'm going to be showing you. But I'm going to pick a key for this demo, an SSH key. And I am going to go ahead and create this droplet, right? So this is just a basic Ubuntu 20 image. Nothing super special here. For that SSH key to make this all work, if we needed to create one, we can create one with this command right here. SSH is built into Windows 10 now. So if I type this command in here, so this is SSH Keygen, and then I'm setting the type of key here. This is actually an elliptic curve type. And what will happen is, and you can put the -C flag here will be for a comment. And here you can put an email address or something you want to identify that SSH key. You type that in, and it'll ask you, what do you want to save this file? I'm just going to say test here, no passphrase, and it will save this key file for me, right? And if we go to the .sh folder, you'll see I've already got a key in here. And this is the key that I use to build that droplet, right? So the droplet's running over here. I got a public IP address. And so let's go ahead and SSH to it. So I'm going to type SSH, and the username for this is going to be root. Put that IP address in, and it's going to ask you, want to validate this key. Cool. So we've SSH'd into our droplet. Now, let's talk about SSH tunnels, okay? So this is what a lot of people like to call poor man VPN, okay? So it allows you to actually tunnel traffic through the SSH tunnel, or the SSH connection. SSH is, what do you call it? SSH is a secure connection to this host. Now, if we want to set up a SSH proxy or an SSH tunnel, we can do a couple different tunnel types. The first one is local, which that will allow us to tunnel local traffic from what do you call it? The remote host to our device. We could also do remote, meaning we could actually tunnel traffic from like a service that's running on my Windows computer. I could allow the remote host to access it. With local, we're going to be able to access it in the inverse, meaning that I'll be able to access a port that's running on this droplet, right? So let's do the first one. This is probably the simplest and most common one, but let's go ahead and make a service. So I'm going to SSH over here on this host. I'm going to do apt-get install. Actually, I got to do apt-get update. Sorry. Apt-get update. I'm going to update the repo, and I'm going to just install Apache. Apache 2. I'm going to say yes to install Apache 2. So this is just going to install default Apache, which is just an HTTP proxy. It's just something that we can kind of access remotely, right? So that's done. Let's go ahead and exit this SSH session. So we're going to kind of disconnect from it. And I'm going to do an SSH port forward, okay? So to do that, I'm going to type in this command here. So SSH, and I don't know why the TAC is out of there. TAC L for local. The first part is the port we want to forward. And then this is so from our host to the remote host on port 80, right? And then with SSH, all we need to do now is just type in a username and the IP address, which is our droplet. All right, cool. So, and what's going to happen is we're just going to reconnect. But if we go over to a web browser over here, and I'm just going to open up a new tab. And if I type 120.0.1, you can see this is the default page for Apache. So now this Apache is not on my Windows host. It's actually on the Linux droplet that I've deployed. And we are connecting to it through the SSH tunnel. And that's an encrypted session. So we have a simple VPN, right? But we're only forwarding port 80, so just one port. And that's the only traffic we can hit. So if I go to a different port, I won't be able to access it. All right. So let's talk about one of the other ways that we can forward traffic. So I just showed you how to forward a port maybe running on this droplet, and I want to be able to access it from my host. But let's try a different way. Let's try a dynamic port forward. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to set up a SOCKS proxy on my host that is initiating the connection. And that SOCKS proxy is going to utilize the droplet to make any other further connections. So to do that, we can type SSH tag D for dynamic, and then whatever port we want to use for this dynamic SOCKS proxy. I'm just going to type 8080, but it can be any port you want. And then again, we'll type username and then the IP address we want to connect to. All right. So let's go ahead and make that. And again, we just get this prompt back. But if we go over to, I'm going to use Firefox for this because it's a little bit simpler to set up the SOCKS proxy. But if you go over to settings and, oops, I didn't mean to close out of that. So if you go over here, go to settings, down at the bottom of Firefox, you have this network settings, and this is where you can set up a SOCKS proxy. So I've went ahead and set this up to 127.0.0.1 for SOCKS, and I'll set the port to 8080. If I say OK there, and then I say google.com, cool. Now,
Ralph,
if I say, yep, go ahead.
I just want to let you know, if I've ever been in those settings tab, I was afraid to touch anything, anything at all. Like, and to watch you go over there, I'm like, what is he doing? That's the forbidden area. No.
So, yeah, right. If I type what's my IP, you can see that this IP is my DigitalOcean droplet, right? So we're actually proxying our traffic, right, over a SOCKS connection. So actually, we're going SSH tunnel, and we're proxying a SOCKS connection to the rest of the internet, right? Or any other device that I want to connect to, right? Cool. So that's kind of the poor man's VPN. And, you know, on security assessments and other things like that, we use this to try to, you know, be able to access traffic on or be able to access ports or other services on a host that's remote, right? And that's pretty useful. But one of the downsides is that we have to set up a SOCKS proxy, which kind of means that I have to change the setting in Firefox. Or what if I have an application that doesn't support SOCKS? Or another problem that comes up is, what if I have an application that needs more than just port 80? I could tell SSH to open every port that I want, or I could move to something like a VPN. Now, there's a bunch of different VPN technologies out there, but today I'm going to quickly demo how to set up WireGuard, which is my current favorite VPN. It uses elliptic curve for the cryptography. It's extremely simple to set up, and it's extremely fast in comparison to a lot of the other VPN technologies out there. Its biggest strength is its simplicity. So let's walk through it real quick. All right. So over on my Droplet here, we are going to install WireGuard. To do that, I'm going to run this command here. So I'm going to do apt-get update, and then I'm going to do apt-get install WireGuard. The other thing that's nice about WireGuard is it is in kernel. So it's a kernel extension. Again, performance and what do you call it? Usability. Another thing too that someone has kind of mentioned up, WireGuard is free, and that is also makes it pretty useful. All right, so we'll say yes here to install WireGuard. And WireGuard works from a cryptography standpoint very similar to how SSH works. You have a public and private key, okay? So for us to set up WireGuard, we got to set up some keys, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and make a private key. And on my Ubuntu host here, I'm going to go ahead and paste this command. So this is going to use WireGuard. It's going to generate a key, and I'm going to output that to this file called Etsy WireGuard private key, okay? Now, when it outputs it, this is actually my private key, all right? And the next command is we are going to output our public key. So with this next command, I'm going to pass in the private key so that we can get the corresponding public key for WireGuard. So what this command will do is it'll output a private key, it'll pipe that into this WireGuard public key, and then it will create a public key. So I'll type that. So now we have a private key and a public key. Now for demo purposes, you can see my private key, but typically you're not going to want to share that out, right? Awesome. So for WireGuard, let's give it a configuration, or let's build a quick configuration. And the configuration for WireGuard is pretty simple. So this next command, I'm going to just use nano, and I'm going to edit this file. We're going to call it wg0.config. And I'm inside of the text editor. There's nothing there. The file's empty. So let's quickly build our configuration. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here.
So what I
the
heard you
top.
say is Nano is the best text editor.
Yes, that's exactly what I said. Nano is the best text editor.
Okay,
I don't know what Vim is.
Okay, I'm just really
Yeah,
seemed
no,
like
I'm
you
really
wanted
we're
to say
starting to
something.
play more here. No.
Okay, it's fine.
Okay, so this configuration is very simple. At the top here, I'm defining the interface. This is for my server, right? And this first value is my private key, which I'm going to have to exit out and paste that in. The next part is the address. So with a VPN, we're going to use an internal IP address. I'm going to use something very simple. This is 10.8.0.1, and it's a -24 sider. So in short, there's 255 IP addresses that could possibly be in this network. I could make it smaller, but just for demo cases, we're going to use this. The next one is the listening port. So WireGuard is going to listen on this port 518020. That's the default WireGuard port. You can change it to whatever you want, but we'll leave it as the default. And that's going to be listening over UDP, okay? And we're going to set this other value, save configuration, to true. Now, I'm going to go ahead and press Control-0, or O, excuse me, to output this file. And then I'll press Control-X to exit. And I need this right here. I need my private key for this configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And let's go ahead and put this in place, right? So this is a base64 encoded private key that WireGuard has produced. And we'll save that. All right. So now we've got our server WireGuard configuration. And now let's go ahead and start the service, right? And with this command here, we're going to run systemctl start WireGuard quick and at wg0.service. So we'll start the service. You can see that the service is running by typing this next command in here. Only thing I'm changing here is status. You can see that it is active. Okay, press Control-C to exit out. All right, so we have our WireGuards running, but we don't have any clients, right? So let's connect to it. So on my Windows host here, I am going to open up PowerShell, make sure I'm running as an administrator. And I'm going to install WireGuard. Now, you can install WireGuard a bunch of different ways. If you go to the, over here I have, if you go to wireguard.com, you can actually go ahead and follow the installation instructions. They're pretty much as installation for every OS out there. But in my case, I'm just going to use PowerShell, and I'm going to use the chocolatey package manager. So I'll type Coco install WireGuard. So, and I'll
Ralph,
say yes.
Can you increase the size of your font if you're going to stay in PowerShell?
This will be it for this one.
Okay.
Sorry. All right. So that is good to go. WireGuard is installed. All right, cool. Now, this is gonna, it installed, maybe it did. Hold on. Let me do a reinstall because I think I exited out before it got. Yes. Let's see if we can find this. So WireGuard is now installed. It's just an application on Windows. And I'm going to open it up. And there's nothing in it because I need to make a configuration for my client, right? So I made one for the, my Ubuntu server that I want to connect to. So let's make this client real quick. So inside of the WireGuard configuration, we're going to go to add a tunnel. And let's just add an empty tunnel, okay? And the client's going to automatically make our public key and private key for us. On the server, we kind of had to input those. So let's type in demo as a name of this. You can call the name whatever you want. And then for our client, let's go ahead and add an address. So the private key is good to go. Let's add an IP address. So on our server, we said 10.8.0.1. And on our client, we're going to use 10.8.0.2. And I'm going to give it the CIDR range of a -24. And I need to tell WireGuard what I want to connect to, like who are my peers, right? So that we're going to create a peer section. So I'm going to copy and paste just a couple lines here. We're going to define the peers. And for peers, all we need is the public key. So I need the public key of the device I want to talk to. And then for allowed IP addresses, this is going to be the IP addresses that would be allowed to converse over this network. And then the endpoint. The endpoint is going to be the public IP address that I'd be able to communicate with, right? So in this case, I need to add the public IP of DigitalOcean right here. So that IP is right here. So this is the public IP address. So let's go over here, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And I need to put the correct public key. This is for a different host, so I'll go over here, and we outputted that just a little bit up here. Where's it at here? It's right here. So this is the public key for our WireGuard. So we'll go ahead and copy that, and we will paste it in. All right, so now we have our public key, allowed IP addresses, and then the public IP address, and then the port. We had set 518020, and we'll say save. All right, cool. Now, on our server here, let's go back and look at our configuration. So in our configuration, we just defined an interface, but we need to tell our server about the peer that's going to connect its public IP address, right? So we need to add one last thing to this configuration. And actually, another way to do it is we're going to use an inline to set that public IP address. And so I'm pasting this command, WireGuard. We're going to set the WG0, which is the interface for WireGuard. And we're going to add a peer, and I'm going to give it an IP address, or excuse me, I'm going to give it the public base 64 key of this peer, right? And that's going to be on our client right here. You can see our public key. It's right here. So we'll go ahead and copy that, and we are going to add this to our server. And for allowed IP addresses, we're going to say its IP address is 8.0.2. I have -32 here, meaning that the only IP address I want to allow this device to be is 0.2. So we'll press enter here. All right. And then if we type in the WG command, we should see our interface, which is WG0, the public key. And then we'll also see that we have a peer now, right? This is the public public key of that peer. And then this is the allowed IP address. All right. Now, all we need to do is connect. So over here on our Windows host with WireGuard, we'll just say activate. And then if we type WG again, we'll now see we're actually transferring data and receiving data. Okay. If we open up another terminal or PowerShell, if I type ping 10.8.0.1, that is the IP address of the server. You can see we are now sending traffic through our WireGuard interface. Additionally, if I type in that IP up here, we can now access our Apache and any other service that's running on this host through our VPN that we just created, right? So now we have a WireGuard VPN setup, and it's pretty simple. We just pretty much exchanged these public keys, right? And allowed them to have access, right? Cool. So that is WireGuard. Now, we're going to take it one more step further and make it even a little bit more simpler. So WireGuard is great because it allows us to use a VPN, and the security is excellent and the speed is excellent. And now we're kind of good to go. But what if you need to configure this on a lot of hosts, right? It could be a lot of keys, a lot of public keys, and how would we manage it? So there's another service out there called Tailscale. Now, Tailscale is pretty much free. There are some limitations to it, but for a simple deployment, this is amazing. Tailscale uses WireGuard underneath. It does not have your private keys. It cannot read any of the data for all the hosts that get connected into more of a mesh. But all it does is exchange out those public keys, right? Somebody also talked about Ansible. You could do this with Ansible as well if you want to just install on a bunch of hosts. But Tailscale makes this even simpler. So I'm going to show you how simple it is to use Tailscale to do WireGuard as well, right?
Also want to say that we are not sponsored by Tailscale.
No, we are not sponsored.
Or these are all things that Ralph just likes.
Okay. Yes, we're not sponsored by any of these people. So we have our WireGuard VPN, but let's go ahead and just deactivate it for now. And let's install Tailscale. So on a Linux host, it's really simple. All we do is I'm just going to paste this one-liner here into my host over here. We can keep WireGuard. It can still be installed. You can run them both. I'm going to paste this install, which is just a bash script to install Tailscale. There is a whole installation documentation if you want to do it another way, but this will actually look up what your OS is and then install it. So I'll type that in, and it is going to install the agent for me, which is pretty much WireGuard with a little bit of a wrapper for exchanging the public keys. All right, so it says Tailscale is up and we're good to go. Now, to log into Tailscale or to like authenticate this host, to like add it to our mesh, we're going to type in the command Tailscale up. If you did the other commands too, if you type attack H, you can see all the commands. You go up, down, log out, network check. There's a bunch of other stuff. But if we type Tailscale up, it's going to say, hey, to authenticate this host, visit this URL. So let's go ahead and just plug that in the browser. And for my account, I am just going to use sign in with GitHub. Now you can sign up with an email, but GitHub is super simple way. You don't have to make a password for this or anything like that. So I'm going to say sign in with Tailscale. I'm going to authorize Tailscale, and there we go. Now, if I go back over to my host and I type Tailscale status, you can see I have some other hosts that I had demoed, and then I have this one right here that's running. So if I go over to my Tailscale interface here, you can see I have a couple hosts. The one that's connected, these ones were, I can remove these machines. I don't need them. All right, so this is the host that I've just connected, and it gives us a IP address. So when I set up WireGuard, I kind of had to define this like IP, like a -24 or whatever network I wanted these hosts to be able to connect it to. With Tailscale, what it uses carrier grade NAT IP addresses. Now, this NAT IP address only I can access, but what do you call it? It automatically assigns these, and then you can use them to communicate with other devices. So let's add another device. So I added our Ubuntu machine, and you can see it in here. Took me literally like 2 minutes, and we are able to connect to it. So, but there's only one machine. Let's add another one. So in PowerShell, as an administrator, I'm going to install Tailscale. So I'm going to do coco install Tailscale. You can also install it manually if you want. I just like the package managers. So it's like yes here. And it's going to go ahead and just download the package for me and install it. All right. Down here, you'll see Tailscale's popped up. It says, hey, you want to add this device? We just need to authenticate. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Again, say, hey, we need to log in. I'll just click on sign in with GitHub. I'll authorize my user account. And we're done. Now, Tailscale, my Vagrant host, which is the host I'm on now, can communicate with the other host. Now, if I type this IP address, all the routing has been done for me. So if I type this in, oh, look, Ubuntu. So now I have our VPN. Now I could keep adding hosts, simply doing the same process, whether it be Mac, Windows, Linux, whatever I want to do, right? I can also route traffic through this by setting the routing settings here. I can use this as an exit node if I've enabled that feature when I run it, so that I can actually route traffic through it, meaning all of the traffic that comes out of my Windows host will route through this Ubuntu machine, right? But now I can go from there. I also have Tailscale also has DNS or Magic DNS to do DNS resolution through, but you can actually use these carrier grade NAT IP addresses to add DNS entries yourself. But yeah, so that is Tailscale, WireGuard, and SSH Tunnels, right? So just to recap, we talked about SSH Tunnels. We talked about doing a local port forward. I didn't show remote port forward, but that's kind of the opposite of the local port forward. Instead of trying to access a resource on the remote device, you'd be trying to access a resource on your local device. I know that's our different terminology there, but dynamic, we showed a SOCKS proxy being able to access things over a SOCKS proxy to our over SSH. We showed WireGuard, how to set up a pretty much a point-to-point VPN with just public and private keys. And then after that, we installed Tailscale and pretty much did the same thing with Tailscale.
So when a hacker says I'm behind 5 proxies, is this what they mean?
When they say what?
I'm behind 5 proxies.
Yes,
You're never gonna find me?
this is what they mean. So, all right. So, to actually elaborate on that question a little bit, we kind of talked about this. So, what happens is that when you're on an assessment or you're actually doing an engagement, sometimes you need to access a machine behind another machine, right? So you have access to one machine that, let's say, maybe it's a VPN or maybe it's over some kind of SOCKS proxies, but you need to access another machine that you need to pivot, right, off of one host to another host. And that's where a lot of the SOCKS proxies come in, right? Using a VPN can maybe alleviate some of that. But yes, the joke is behind 7 proxies, right? Because you're connected from one host to the next host to the next host. Mm-hmm. They call that a proxy chain.
Okay. And so I could just use NordVPN and I'll be fine. Like I just
So the things that we talked about today are not necessarily to be able to browse with more anonymous browsing. They're more allow you to transfer traffic securely between hosts, right? Or add other hosts that could be part of like a mesh, right? In the Tailscale and with WireGuard, you can also make a mesh. I showed just a bridge, meaning just 2 hosts talking to each other, but you can actually have a third host that can communicate with the other 2 hosts, and all of them, meaning that if one host goes down, they still can continue to communicate with the hosts that are still online. That's the way Tailscale works by design as well.
Okay.
So no server.
Sido 1878, thanks for following. Dark Radar? Dark? They're a subscriber. So on Twitch, we have subscriptions and followers. So thank you so much for doing that. Serena, you got any follow-ups, any questions? And then I guess while you're talking, anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, we like to just jump right in with the demo and then ask questions at the end. If we do our webcast on Thursdays, then it's all like pre-show banter, and then we give a webcast. But this one's reverse. Serena, did you have anything?
I don't.
Very self-explanatory. I wrote down your private key. So what does that get me? What does that private key get me? Is it anything? Do I get any prize?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
So why, just like in SSH, you have this public and private key, right? Mm-hmm. And the point of PKI is that you only share the public key with everyone, right? You don't need to know my private key for us to have a secure communication. Knowing someone's public key allows you then to utilize or replicate that connection, right? So in the WireGuard example, knowing the private key allows you to actually, if you know both the public and private, and you can set them up to add another host, right? So
this wasn't like a secret CTF, right? Where there's a Bitcoin at the end of this challenge.
Yes, there's a Bitcoin at the end of the challenge now.
They're so cheap now, we can give it away.
Oh, Bitcoin's for everybody.
Someone asked, yes, Bitcoin's for everyone. Someone asked how much the Droplet cost. So when you're going over and making a Droplet, I think it's like maybe $15 or something like that. Depends on which Droplet you pick, right? But they're just simple for showing off and demoing.
Here's a sort of, I think it's a question from earlier in the chat. Meeting is behind. You can read that.
Big old DDoS pressure. All right. So this is actually a great question. So carrier grade NAT actually has to do with IP address space, IPv4 address space allocation, right? So we're probably all accustomed to something like 192.168, 1.1, right? Like your home IP, right? You probably have that IP address space. This is what they call like a private IP address spacing. The 10 network, actually, I think it's a -16 on the 10. Or in the -8, excuse me. All of the 10.0.0.0 network, you can assign to a internal network, meaning that those aren't publicly accessible IP addresses, right? For that range, right? But carrier grade NAT is a special cutout of all the available IP addresses of IPv4 that are utilized for doing NAT translation. So it allows a ISP to, in essence, have some IP addresses that aren't 192.168.1, and so you don't conflict with an internal network that you might possibly have, right? That's what the carrier grade NAT. It allows your ISP to kind of give you an IP that's not actually public, but won't conflict with an internal IP address that you could have set up on your network, right? And in the case that I showed with Tailscale, they use that address space to accomplish the same mission, which is so that if they give you this IP address, you shouldn't have an internal IP address that is in the same network range, right? But there's no like actual what do you call it, firewall separation that WireGuard is doing with this. It's just making sure you get an IP address that doesn't conflict with one that you possibly have already set up. Does that make sense?
Yep. We got a question from Desynced, also just followed. Thanks so much. What is the cheapest, fastest VPN provider to run WireGuard off of a month? Anyone have any suggestions? And once again, whatever answer we give will not be a sponsor of this channel.
All right. So you want the cheapest. All right. I know the cheapest. There is another company out there called Hetzner, and they actually are based out of Germany, but they just opened a data center in the US. And I believe you can run VMs there for like $5, $6, and they have twice the resources of DigitalOcean. So very cheap. If you want like a full, like, virtual machine that you could want to run off of. So
yeah, and you expense all this, right?
What?
You expense all these droplets and VPNs.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but if you want a cheap one, that's a good one. I saw actually another question too. What are my preference between these and Zero Tier? Zero Tier is another kind of like similar product to Tailscale. It just doesn't use WireGuard underneath. Tailscale is technically actually just WireGuard, but it's doing that whole public key exchange, so I don't have to keep track of all the public keys and all the devices that I want to add. I haven't got to play a whole lot with Zero Tier, but right now, kind of my preference is either Tailscale or WireGuard for doing it, but it's very quick.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on this Antisyphon live stream. Want to let you know that Ralph does teach. He's like a teacher. Like that's where we get the people to come on and present, because they really have like hours and hours of content where we're like, hey, can you just take a little piece of it? Or could you take something that you're thinking about adding to the class? Or could you take something that you were like, I probably want to add this to the class? Or if you're like, hey, this would actually help people in the class. So that's where our instructors and that's where our people come from. So if you're ever interested in that, Ralph has a class, and you teach like this for like 4 days, 4 hours a day, right?
Yep. And for everyone who, if you did have a hard time keeping up, I have all the lab docs, right? So everything's taken a picture, every command is there, kind of everything to follow along too. So.
And this is recorded, so you can watch it again. And it's recorded,
yes. You can watch it over and over and over again, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. And the classes are recorded too. You get those for 6 months.
That's also true, yeah.
Some of them are on demand.
Where to find the recordings is on the Antisyphon YouTube channel or Twitch channel.
So all of that to sum up is we are sponsored by Antisyphon Training. You got everything today. Yeah, we're sponsored by Antisyphon Training. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for following. Thanks for subscribing. And hope to see you on. We'll be back tomorrow with Steve. Steve's coming here tomorrow. So we're going to have Steve
bringing
tomorrow.
The big guns.
Yeah. All right, Ralph, thank you. Serena, thank you. Ryan, thank you. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Kill it, Ryan.